Hello, everybody, and welcome to our IBM Z security and ecosystem series. Yeah, secure your system with our ecosystem is the topic, and today I will have very, very good and interesting guests from software engineering and Helvetia with me, and we will talk about audit handling in finance and insurance. So my name is Patrick Hempler from IBM. I'm the Z-Stack platform lead in DACH, and yeah, so far all for me. And I highly welcome Roy Boxwell from software engineering and Dirk and Fred from Helvetia. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much for the intro, Patrick. My name is Roy Boxwell from Software Engineering, based over here in Germany. This is obviously my home office. It's not actually the office in Düsseldorf where I work most of the time, but I'm basically the lead developer and the senior software architect at the firm, responsible for Workload Expert, which is the tool that we're going to be discussing for use with Audit and all its features today. I'm also the lead on the real-time DBA Expert, which is our tool for generating utilities for mainframe DB2 maintenance, doing reorgs, copies, run stats, modifies, everything like that. If you have any questions as I'm doing my presentation, feel free to enter them in the chat and I will try and answer them as we go. If not, there's time at the end of the presentation, of course, for a live Q&A. I'm always willing to answer questions as long as they don't go far too off topic. So that's enough from me. Now I want to introduce and hand you over to one of our customers who has kindly agreed to co-present or co-produce this today, and that's the Helvetia. And I want to introduce you to Fred, one of their lead DBAs.
Hello, my name is Stefan Flint, and I'm the team leader of the team Sysproc of Helvetia Insurance Company. We are a Swiss company with a residency in Germany, in Frankfurt, and I'm responsible for the Sysproc, DBA, and operating. I hand over to Dirk.
Oh, you're on mute, Dirk. Oh, I think we've just lost Dirk's sound. No, we've lost Dirk's sound. But Dirk is also one of the lead DBAs at the firm Helvetia and is involved with the Workload Expert tool and doing its integration and reporting functionality. So, Jim, if you could line up the first set of slides. Okay. So, for some reason, I'm on the very last page, Jim. You gotta love this. Here we go. That looks a lot better. So the point of today is, of course, security. Now, WLX, Workload Expert, is the abbreviation. When the idea first came out many years ago, the idea was to have a software that would capture all of the SQL that's running on your machine, everything in your enterprise. So all the dynamic SQL, not your static SQL. Now, this, of course, was made possible when IBM came out in version 10 with the IFKID 400-401 pairing. We had it for years with the 316, 317, 318 for dynamic SQL, but the picture was only really completed when IBM came out with the 400-401 IFKIDs. This enabled you then to be able to capture all of the SQL running on your enterprise, if, of course, you're running high speed enough to do it. And so my firm, Software Engineering, decided to actually write a monitor which captures all this information. And of course, we're looking at it, and we looked at it in those days from the view of a performance DBA, because there's fantastic performance data. You're aware of all these statistics, which are in the 316, 317, 318 data, and of course in the 400-401. So it gave immensely good, very, very cheap, so to speak, for CPU resources, performance metric data, so that DBAs and application DBAs and even programmers could tune and make their software better. This was fine, all well and good, everything was fine. But then what we saw, and what was very interesting, is the way the market then slowly changed. And what the market did is, well, hang on, if we can see everything that's running on that box in the corner of the machine, won't it tell us all of the data that people are accessing? Of course, yes, it does, as long as you start the correct ifkids. Won't it tell us all the commands people are issuing? Yes, it will. Won't it tell us all the utilities that are running? Of course. Won't it do all the other data? And so we started adding more and more and more of the ifkids to implement all, at the end of the day, all of the audit functionality which you could imagine having on a mainframe computer running DB2. And so we now capture a whole bunch of ifkids, but it's all extraordinarily low cost when it comes to CPU and overhead. We then process all of these either synchronously or asynchronously, depending on the type of ifkid and depending on the occurrence. And all of this, of course, tells you everything that's going on your machine when it comes to DB2 for z/OS. And so this then became the audit view of how the system works. So if you can take me to the next slide, please, Jim. And so this is, you could think of it as, is this Big Brother watching you, or are you trying to watch everyone trying to get in on your machine? Of course, you could look at it both ways. I think it's more of Big Brother, but of course, we have over here in Europe GDPR, and there's similar things in America, where, and in other countries, of course, where a lot of the data and a lot of the accesses and everything that you do, you have to make sure that it's being traced and it's being proved that the system is being handled and done correctly. And so the big question is, how can you actually do this? So if you can go to the next one, please, Jim. So this is the agenda. I just want to run through audit. Why bother? What's it all about? The Workload Expert, WLX for short, what it basically does. The audit functions that we add into it. And what I could say is the brave new world. Eclipse, of course, is not the brave new world. Eclipse is old as the hills, basically. What's new is we've now ported all of what we did in Eclipse across into Zoe. And if you don't know what Zoe is, it's a bit late. You want to get on board the Zoe bandwagon. You want to start trying to use this. And so I've got a couple of shots right at the very end just about how it looks in Zoe, but we won't go too much into detail because you can do an internet search, look at my presentations from iDugs, where I've spoken about Zoe, how you implement it and how it looks. It is basically the way forward, because a lot of people are scared or put off or think that the green screen, the big machine in the corner, is no longer topical. They think it's dead, it's legacy, it's bad news. It isn't, it's still there. And Zoe is the brand new front end to enable people who don't even know they're working on a mainframe to work on a mainframe. Okay, if we can go to the next one. And then the next one, that's just the placekeeper. Why audit? Yeah, you could be, of course, like the ostrich. You might say, I don't care about audit. This is nothing to do with me. I am an application DBA. I'm a DBA. Audit is the group of people down the road or down in the cellar. This is nothing to do with me. Sadly, that's not the true. Just as I mentioned briefly, we've got GDPR. We've got lots of laws all over the place. Sarbanes-Oxley. There's the due diligence that DBAs, application programmers and application DBAs have to have these days. And of course, the company itself must be able to prove to the external auditors and, of course, your internal revision or internal auditors, which you should also have, of course, these days, that the data is being processed with due diligence and maximum care. So even if you think this is nothing to do with you, it is something to do with you. And it might not be you personally, but it is you as a firm. You are involved with this. So if we can go on a slide. So why audit? As I mentioned, you've got regulations. We've got the internal regulations and the even more powerful external regulations. If you look at my GDPR audit presentation from iDug, you'll see that the fines which companies can be fined for abusing GDPR are huge, and they are these days being leveraged. It started light. It started with 100,000 euros here, 10,000 euros there. But if you see the news, people are getting fined 30 million euros these days. And so the question is, how could you possibly not do this? And so the next question, next slide, please, Jim. All your critical company data, regardless of what system it is, so your operating system, your databases, your network traffic, everything everything you have, especially your critical data, normally these days is stored somewhere along the line, perhaps even duplicated, cloned, and copied on a DB2 system. And the internal revision, the external revision, and GDPR insist that any accesses, any possible accesses, any changes to this has a paper trail. And you have to be able to prove that what you're doing is absolutely fine. Yeah. Next slide, please, Jim. And so this basic principle of auditing is you must be able to do the 4 W's. Who did what, when, and where. Yeah. And you could even try this from where did they do it? Did they do this data change or data selection or data update from inside the firm, so an intranet, or from outside the firm as an external, an internet access? Yeah. And so it's one of these things which you just have to do these days. You can't not do it. Next one, please. And so you want a fully automatic check of all your critical data access. You don't want this to be done manually. This must be fully automatic. And of course, you have to do a fully automatic check of privileged user access. Now, I happened to do a Unix system services training course today. And one of the things was I asked the trainer, I said, oh, I see a process ID number 1. Can I kill that? And he said, Roy, don't even think about trying to cancel process ID number 1. I said, why not? I said, he did not know, even as a trainer that trains people in Unix system services, what would happen to his system if I killed it. Because as a super user, and I was a super user, I had to do mounting and unmounting of ZFS accesses. So you've got to be a super user to do this. Otherwise, you can't do it. And you can kill, of course, process ID 1. And so when the training had a coffee break, I said to one of our system programmers, could I try this in our test system? And he told me, don't you even think about it. So you have to make sure what are your privileged users, super user in the Unix system services world, what are they doing? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Or are they doing something that they're not supposed to be doing? Or are they doing things at times of the day or days of the week where they shouldn't be doing anything? Yeah, you have to be able to follow this as like an audit trail. Yeah. Okay, Jim. Then you have the update controls. You have to see which user updated which table and when did they do it. This is similar to the privileged user, but the privileged user can, of course, do much, much more than just like a column update or a row delete or something. Yeah. And you have to see on the privileged users, what have they been doing? Yeah. And so what happens is you eventually add, what we did is we added lots of use cases, separate little use cases, and each of the use cases does one piece of the jigsaw puzzle of audit. Yeah. And so you end up with this huge data lake of data, which you can then export in various ways down to the SIEM system of your choice. Because you got to bear in mind, DB2 on ZOS, it might be the biggest guy on the block, but there's lots of blocks these days. And DB2 ZOS isn't running on all of them. But your auditing and your access controls should be running on every bit of hardware you've got. And you should be pooling this data into your SIEM system of choice so you can then push this out to external auditors and say, here, everything is fine, not just on the ZOS. We don't stand alone. ZOS on its own is not the only thing in the world. Yeah, we are aware of this. We might not to admit it to our colleagues on the smaller machines and, as I love to say, the ones you could lift. But sadly, it's true. Yeah, we don't stand alone anymore. Okay, so next one, please, Jim. So once you've got these use cases there, you want to guarantee that there's no requirement for any of this from within the actual IT department. Yeah, it might sound untrustworthy. It might sound, people don't trust us anymore. But if you think about it, going back just a couple of releases in DB2, we had the separation of duties, sysadmin, secadmin. All the DBAs in the whole world, gnashing of teeth, wailing, much crying and shouting. But it is the only really way forward. And I would sincerely hope that the customers out there, anyone with a sysadmin authority, it's on a bit of paper with a one-time use password locked in a box in the computer room. And after it's been used once to do the one job it's good for, whatever that is, it then gets a new password and changed. And so the whole idea is no one in the IT department should be doing this. It's got to be done automatically and then completely taken away, so that no one can say, but those IT guys, they deleted the data before we could check it. Yeah. And of course, the beginning and the end of audit is how long do you want to keep the data for? Now, this, of course, is the eternal question of how long is a piece of string? And I would say it's half L times 2. But of course, the rule of thumb is you keep as much of the data as you possibly can for as long as you physically can. And what we've done as a solution, because you can imagine you get quite a lot of data when you're looking at every single SQL that runs on every single machine that you have in your Plex. What we offer to our customers is the ability to actually export that data down to a Linux, Unix, Windows image, because the disks on Linux, Unix, Windows are really cheap in comparison to the ones on the mainframe in the corner, which are cheaper as they were a few years ago, but they're still, in comparison, very expensive. And so it makes a lot of sense just to basically dump the data from the mainframe down onto the Linux, Unix, Windows, where you can then keep that data for 10, 15, 20 years, because it's basically free in comparison to the mainframe disks. And of course, having that data offloaded, normally you never want to look at it. Because, of course, if you want to look at this data, you need indexes, you got to reorg it on a regular basis and run stats. But if most of the data, let's say after 30 days, you push everything down to the Linux, Unix, Windows, you can still access it. It's still there on Linux, Unix, Windows, and you can still access it with DRDA, no problem. But, of course, it's not very fast. But for auditing, speed is of no importance. Yeah, if you want to see how that person, when that person did what to which table, if it takes 5 minutes to come back as a query for the last 10 years, who cares? We're not talking sub-second online response here. We're talking audit. We have to make sure we have the data. Performance is real. It doesn't matter. Yeah, which is why the idea, keep a month on the machine, push the rest down to the box you can lift. Okay, if we can move on one. Yeah. Okay, and again. So now I want to just, here's a schematic of how the Workload Expert works. On the left-hand side, you can see we have the efficient data collection. And here, the Workload Expert itself is written using OPX buffering and 64-bit assembler. And so we're using above the beam memories and everything else. And so we're running as fast as we possibly can. We're catching any and all of the IFKIDs that are being kicked out of the master address space. And we're writing them to a what we call a log. That log file, when it's full, gets written out. And then normally every hour, we say, okay, on the hour there, we do the capture processing. And with the capture processing, we then enrich the data. If you want, you don't have to. You can just write the data out as we get it. Yeah. And so with the capture processing, you can then pull data from the DB2 catalog or the runtime statistics. Yeah. And the Workload Expert will also do explains if required. For static SQL, I would hope you're binding everything with explain yes. Yeah. And so the real question there is, if you're not binding with explain yes, why not? Explain tables are the absolute gold standard. It's the only real way to know how your data is being accessed. And so this is where the Workload Expert harks back to its workload. Yeah. It's looking at a workload on your machine, and it will do the explains for you, of course, but that explain is at now time, not when that package was bound 3 years ago. Yeah. And of course, the explain access pattern 3 years ago could be different from now. So, but hopefully none of you got that. If you do, we can warn you. That's optional as well. The dynamic SQL that comes in, obviously, you're running with 300 million SQLs every hour. And so to explain all of it would be impossible. There's no way you can possibly do that. But what we do is we condense all of the SQL that comes in with a thing called explain reduction. And the explain reduction looks at the data that we've already processed and says, we've already had this SQL. I won't bother explaining it again. We've already had this one. And what we see is normally people run the workloads for about 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, and then swap to a new workload. And of course, at the start of the workload, we explain all the dynamic SQL. As the workload progresses through the week, we're explaining less and less and less and less, because of course that SQL has already been explained. And so we see dramatic reductions in the number of explains that we're having. And so this works really, really well. All of this data, once it's all been processed, enriched, reduced, however you want to call it, then gets pushed out to the Workload Expert repository, which is a bunch of DB2 tables, What else? We also recommend that they should be set with compress yes, yeah, because the text compresses really well, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that compresses really well in all these tables. So that's the recommendation, to keep the size down a bit. And if you like, you can set it up to be partitioned, so that that's spread over the partitions of the day of the year. So you get 366 partitions. These days, of course, you can set it up to be a PBR RPN, my favorite TLA. And then with this PBR RPN, you can have obviously different sizes per partition, and you can alter it dynamically on the fly. Works fantastically. Best thing in DB2 version 12 ever. And that basically is all we do on the mainframe. There is nothing else. There's no front end on the mainframe. Yeah, it's all just there because we're trying to keep it light on the mainframe. And then we first came out with the middle part here. So if you can go to the next one, please, Jim. So the next one was just the graphical user interface based on Eclipse. Yeah, and it was a plug, or still is if you want to. You can get it. It's a plugin which plugs into native Eclipse. Works best, though, obviously, if you plug it into Data Studio. Yeah, because if you plug it into Data Studio, we have a dynamic link into Visual Explain. And that, of course, is really nice. Visual Explain is one of my favorite bits of Data Studio. And I've always wondered why IBM have hidden it under 16 levels of clicking. With our Workload Expert interface, we got a direct link into Visual Explain, and that works really well. And as I mentioned at the top, we don't have any links into DB2. We're not zapping any modules. It's absolutely stable. Don't care what DB2 you're running, as long as it's version 10 new function mode or higher. Including the newly released 13, it all works fine. So then, next one, please, Jim. And it's a vanilla DB2. Yeah, we only use IBM APIs. Nothing secret, dodgy, running up and down chaining lists which get updated or invalidated and cause nasty things to happen. We are using OPX. It's all official, nothing illegal. And then on the right-hand side, the newest kid on the block, of course, is Zoe. And Zoe is the new front end. That is, we've now ported everything that was in Eclipse into Zoe, and we see Zoe as the way forward. There's so many projects coming out on Git and everything else. A lot of people are getting involved in it. We've done a few Zoe applications which have been open source approved or OSM approved. I forget all the buzzwords these days because I'm still basically a mainframe guy. I had my first wrestlings the last week or so with Unix system services and doing mounts and unmounts, all for me, brand new. But of course, most people out there probably know all of this. So if we can go to the next one, please, Jim. And the next one, that's just the audit functions. So what does Workload Expert give you? Well, it gives you the ability to capture the complete view over the whole enterprise. As I mentioned, everything. It gives you all the static and all the dynamic SQL that's running on there. It's giving you everything that's been flushed, because, of course, one of the most annoying things is the SQL statement that you never see. And no matter how quickly you snap a dynamic statement cache, if you're running in production and you're a shop that's doing any sort of work, you will miss statements because they're going to be flushed before you snap the cache. And so that's what our started task does. It captures the flushed SQL as well. And if you run the started task and the snaps often enough, even the flushed SQL has been captured for processing once. And so we can do a clean analysis of it. Because as you are aware, flushed SQL only gets the first 60 bytes. Very, very rare that you could do an explain of 60 bytes. It does happen at shops because some people use sysIBM sysdummy1 for the ping stay alive check. We pull up all of the utility access. This is one of the things that's been launched in DB2.13. They've now finally actually managed to externalize the utility access, but you've got it with us and it's complete. We have all of the utilities and everything that's going on in DB2.13. They've just started rolling out the utilities, so it's not everything, sadly. And of course, the other one, which is very important that you've got to catch, is when the primary authorization ID changes. Yeah, now there's lots of different ways that this can change. From the most banal that you can imagine, set the current SQL ID. That's not tricky, is it? But it's all the really interesting ones that come in, like trusted context when you switch to being a role, or KICS translation, IMS translation. All of these things happen in the background, and you're not normally 100% aware of them. Here, we capture them all. So you can see this SQL was the primary auth ID, but it came in as this auth ID. So you can see that Roy came in and was translated to Elvis and then did the instruction. Yeah, and so you got to know that. Anyone who's privileged, if you're a DB-admin, a sysadmin with or without data access, everything that you do is logged. Yeah, and so we mark that, because if you're doing a user data change as a privileged user, you must have a job ticket. I don't know any firm in the world where they do updates in production without having a job ticket. And if you don't have a job ticket, something's gone wrong. Yeah, because that has to be done. No one should be allowed to change anything in production in user data without the permission. Yeah, so you've got to have all of that. You also need to have all of the DB2 console commands. Again, it might sound a bit crazy, but if someone is stopping the ifkids that this system is using to run, you want to see that. What if someone stops the ifkid from, say, 8:30 to 8:45? You've got a 10-minute window where perhaps something happened that you're not aware of. But of course, here we're trapping all the console commands, so you can see that something happened. And that is then the point to start saying, okay, now I've got to investigate exactly what SQLs were going on there. Yeah, you got to look for privilege elevation and de-escalation within this period of time, etc., etc. You get the idea. Naturally, anything with grants and revokes, you've got to know. If anyone is granted anything, you have to know it. Revokes, you also have to know, because that's when people get a privilege and then revoke it. You want to know that. And of course, the idea, as I mentioned right at the start, is it's all in DB2, and we have this option to bung it down to the small machines in the corner of the room, where you can stuff in terabytes of storage, and it's basically, I mean, it's not free, but it's a lot cheaper than the mainframe storage. What else do we offer? We offer, I mentioned SIEM briefly. To get down to the SIEM system of choice, there's two basic ways, as far as I can tell from the market. And so we've covered both. We've got a Leaf API. Yeah, so this is running with Unix system services, which is one of the reasons I was on the course, to see if we can make it faster and tune it and everything else. But it works fine. And the idea of this is it takes everything out of the database that you're interested in, puts it into the correct Leaf 2.0 format, and then ready to be ingested into your data lake or SIEM system or Splunk or whatever you want to do with it. And the syslogger is the same, but using the syslogger API. So that's basically a UDP. Yeah, so it's just throwing the data out and hoping it gets caught. It's horses for courses. Yeah, you can choose whether to use Leaf or whether to use syslogger. We supply both. It's no problem. No hooks or links into DB2, so it's stable. We will not bring down DB2 or your APAR. And of course, we're running just using the IBM APIs. So we are extremely stable and fast. Yeah, OPX is unbelievably quick. And we, in one log write out up to a maximum of 80 cylinders of data. And you can have up to 474 of these before you must run one of our analysis jobs to then clear out all these logs. Yeah. Okay, next one. So the mainframe backend is exactly the same for Eclipse and for Zoe. Both, of course, use Type 4 Java, and that gives you the benefit, being a Type 4 Java connection, that the long-running, sometimes very complex data mining SQL is eligible for zip offload. So if that happens and it gets offloaded as zip, then that long-running SQL was, of course, basically free. Eclipse requires a local. The sad thing about Eclipse at this moment in time, as we are all aware, everything you do, everything I do these days, I got to have my smartphone with me, because it goes blim and I have to enter either a random number, or I get an SMS with a TAN, or it's all MFA, yeah, multifunction authorization. Eclipse does not at this point in time support it. There are things afoot that it might, and you can get these one-time use passwords, which does then work. But Zoe is just an HTML5 compatible browser that is required, and that is all modern browsers. Yeah, if you're watching this stream now, by definition, you've got an HTML5 browser. That's all you need. And Zoe supports MFA. Yeah, so you've got that multifunctional, multi-factor authentication. Normal browser login, you put in your user ID and password, and then log on. And here it's in German, of course. That's our token that we've developed for the audit tool. We've got the other things in there: Space Manager, Space Assurance Expert, and the normal Workload Expert. And if you go to this one, we then here have a list of drop-down boxes at the top of the screen in the Workload Expert GUI, where you can then decide. And here's just a a list of some, not all, of the audit use cases that come with the tool out of the box. So you can get an idea of the depth and the coverage that this gives you. And this runs in Zoe or in Eclipse. Choice is yours. Okay, so I am finished with mine. I think I can now hand over back to Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Thank you very much. Very interesting. So I have a couple of short questions. As you said, you're not hooking into DB2 and that you have a very fast solution. So maybe you can say a couple of words on the overhead you expect. I know this is always a touchy topic, and but as you use the standard APIs and not implementing a dedicated service within DB2, I could imagine the overhead is not such a big issue.
No, from my experience, we have customers over here. One of ours has got his 14-way data sharing, and that's running with one started task, and you could run it as a started task per member if you really wanted to, but he's running it as one started task for all 14, and they're running with nearly every ICI, nearly every IFKID that's possible. And the overhead is background noise. They have not seen anything. But on the other hand, it's a 14-way data sharing, and so the power of that is immense. Not every shop's got that. Whether you would want to switch on absolutely everything 24/7 is, of course, another question. I would say to some places there's always IFKIDs which are interesting to have, like the IFKID 340, for example, for SQL return codes, which you could definitely argue is not an audit event. An SQL code minus 803 or a minus 501, but perhaps a minus 551. Would you want to see that? Possibly. Would it be auditable? But what happens if your coders are using some horrible Java system which produces 16 million 222s every couple of hours because they're running into holes while going through scrollable cursors? I've seen everything. I've seen millions of minus minus 501s. Millions and millions of minus 501s in Kix transactions, always doing a close before the start of the Kix transaction. Makes no sense, but you've got to be sure that it's closed, but it's the start of the transaction. And of course, but no one changes these programs. So you have to make a decision and say, am I really interested in this data? And then you can say, no, the overhead is too much and it has no real business. But I have seen people tend to quote 2 to 5% as overhead. I'm more than happy to go with that. I've never seen it worse.
So this is always the point, right? So there will always be a kind of overhead, and it's your choice how deep you want to audit the system,
absolutely.
That has a direct impact on the overhead and the processing. So definitely,
every single IFKID you switch on has an overhead. Sometimes it's negligible. And there's one John Campbell told me years ago. It's the whenever a 4K page of memory is used, he said, "Never switch that on, Roy."
So you better shouldn't do so.
No, your system just grinds to a halt. But for all the audit stuff, no problem. Absolutely.
Okay. Great. And I saw you also mentioned you can push the information you have to a CM. So you can use it as a part of your overall security and auditing strategy, right? So even together with you mentioned the systems you can lift, So you can build up a complete picture, right? And,
you have to. You have to these days. But it's always nice to think that the ZOS is the only man on the block. It's not true. We never stand alone. And so the idea is we have customers. They have a huge Splunk data lake, and everything just chucks data into that. One of ours is using Leaf to just throw data into that. I mean, I don't even know where that machine physically is. And then they use the Splunk system to then take all that data out and then use it for auditing and metrics and KPIs. fascinating stuff, but it's outside of my area of expertise. Yeah,
definitely. So, but it makes the point clear, which we saw in the last session as well, that there's always more than just this one silo, and it's not a silo as we had it in the past. Yeah, we are in a connected world. We are in a hybrid cloud, in a hybrid world. So at all, where do you see the strengths of IBM C systems in context of this auditing aspect?
Let's face it, but I don't know how many people have managed to successfully hack into a Z system. SQL injection, of course, not included, because that could always happen if no one's checking and parsing the inputs correctly. But the Z system is pretty bulletproof. The moment you go data sharing, you get 99.9999% availability. The system's always there. The systems are always relevant. Security is, you could argue, using DB2 internal security is not the best way forward. You should definitely go external. I'm a bit strange there. I actually really like ACF2, but I'm a bit weird. Most shops, of course, use RACF. I even know a couple that still use Top Secret, but that's really disappeared these days. But of course, what I loved about ACF2 and still do, and it might be true of RACF these days, I'm really not too sure, is the ACF2 was never trust anyone. Okay. Yeah, and never say a command even exists. Whereas RACF said, permission denied, and so an attacker would know that command actually existed. Whereas ACF2 just goes, huh? you have no idea as an attacker. Have you actually found something which you could then work on to try and leverage your knowledge to get your way into the system? But I think RACF is a lot better these days. I saw with Unix System Services, a super user is madness. It's up there with sysadm. And I hate to think how many people have got super user out there on the mainframe. I really don't want to think about it, but I'm seriously thinking about writing a little bit of software. Now I know how it all works and hangs together, which can then actually tell you who your users are and are they super users, because they're the ones which shouldn't really be there. That's the sysadm that should be locked away in the vault. You need it, but it's got to be very carefully used. And that's where ZOS just wins. I think when you get it out of the box, it's secure, and that's not the case with anything else.
Yep, definitely. I totally agree. So, okay, great. So I would have a lot of other questions, but maybe we should also have a look to Fred and Dirk and bring them back to the stage. So really happy to hear the Helvetia point on that stuff.
Okay. Could I have my... Yes. Okay, next one. Well, let's take a brief look to the agenda. Most important for us has been the auditor's requirements. After these, I will show you the WLX audit functions and how we process the data until we have sufficient auditor report. And last topic will be the segregation of duty. Next. The requirements of Kpmg look very simple and basic. They just want to have monitored everything, every change within the productive data, and who is responsible to the changes. So we provide a list of privileged users that is rather short, because we are only 2 DBAs at Helvetia for the administration of the productive and the development systems. The question how the data is being changed is also simple. We use, like most companies, online transaction via 6 in our case, a lot of batch jobs that are changing data, and in addition, the DBA are changing data triggered by other requests. The DBA activities are the main focus of the auditors. WLX protocols are stored within DB2 tables, as Roy mentioned before. The DBA of Helvetia do not have access to these tables. Next, please. Oh. WLX offers more functions than we use. We just bought the audit part of WLX. As you can see in the slide, WLX covers everything that changes data in DB2, including the text of the static and dynamic SQL statements that explained Roy before. WLX is closely coupled with the DB2 instance, so that from the DB2 start to the DBA shutdown, the complete life cycle is monitored. As you can see here, we provide only a subset of all changes to fulfill the auditor's demand. The focus is the complete reporting of the DB2 activities, DBA activities. Reading data and manipulation of data via online access are not part of these reports. Next, please. As you can see here, we provide only a back, please. Sorry. As you can see here, we provide only a subset of all changes to fulfill the auditor's demands. The focus is the complete reporting of DB2 activities, as I said before. The job A400 DB2 is a batch job that has a fixed name but a variable content. If corrections are requested by special departments or for error corrections requested by development teams, the request SQL statements are inserted into this job and submitted via direct DB2 intervention or by the scheduling system. The output of these jobs is stored for 10 years into our job log archive system, EOS. The request itself is stored in a special mail-in database for via WLX purposes. The audit process itself consists of a bunch of batch activities. We check if WLX was up and running over the complete lifecycle of DB2. We verify that every change has a corresponding order and a corresponding entry in EOS. After all checks passed, we create an audit report on a monthly basis. Next, please. To provide the segregation of duty, we split all doings into two parts. Part 1, all the batch parts listed on slide part 1 are driven automatically by the scheduling system. The DBA have neither access to the scheduling system itself nor access to the reports. For checks, we ask SEG to support us with their skills because we only have 2 DBAs in place and cannot provide one person to control the other only. So SEG is acting for consulting purposes also. We have the batch jobs, we send the outputs to them and they check independent from us the output. They ask for evidence that every action was issued by a corresponding order. They also have a look to the content of the SQL statements. If everything passes properly, a testified report is being sent to the department that is in contact to the auditors. So we don't have any influence on either the monitoring nor the check process. One back, please. Page 8. Yeah. You can see here a little part of an WLX report, and on the next page you can see how it was produced. It was the batch job itself is not very high sophisticated. It's just a normal DB2 access, and the input statements you can see below is corresponding to the picture on the slide before. Yeah, here you can see the update. The update on line 3 is corresponding with a picture on the next slide. So that's what is from my side. If you need further information, don't hesitate to contact Dirk and me directly. Dirk will be the better address, I suppose. Thanks for attending, and back to Patrick.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fred. Very interesting. And thanks for the insight how you use the product. So yeah, very clear for me. I currently have no further question regarding this part. Let me check if there are any comments from outside of our bubble. Can't see anything right now in the comments, but Roy, you look like you have a question.
I'm terrible. I'm terrible. If anyone's watching this and they want to see me live, then come to iDoug Boston. I'll be there. But one very important bit, which the Helvetia guys forgot to mention, is my firm is also doing the external auditing. We do this for various other customers as well, because they don't have the staff, they don't have the time, and as I mentioned, they shouldn't be doing it anyway. You should never really be auditing yourself. It's like putting me in charge of your beer and whiskey collection. Not a good idea. But what they do, of course, is they give us all the data. We then process the data. We digitally sign it as a PDF and send it back, so they can give that off to their internal auditors. Everything's fine. What then happens is every year, maybe 6 months, we then get audited that we, as a firm, software engineering, are auditing the customer correctly. Yeah. Okay. So there's and it's very cool. Yeah. So the auditors get the data on a regular basis, every month, every week, however, whenever you want it. And then we also get audited that we are doing the data auditing correctly, because it's a bit like who watches the watchers. Yeah. Okay. And I think it's an important thing just to know that we are also available to do that. Of course, the question is, who's watching the watchers doing the watching? I mean,
yeah,
but that we have to discuss over that we have to discuss over beer and whiskey, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So great. So let me summarize. It's very important to know what's going on the system, and to have it over the time, to have for your own and also for external auditors. Yeah. Something where you can see and show, okay, that was happening, that was not happening. And so I also learned everything is audible, so to say, but it's always a question how deep you go, how deep you want to go, and what do you want to see, what do you need to see. But it's a very important point of the overall security strategy, and a very, very important puzzle piece in the strategy.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Roy. Thank you very much, Dirk and Fred.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Fred.
Yes, so we do not have any questions right now in the comments. So I'm happy to let you out to the sunny afternoon. But first of all, I would like to give a hint to our joiners, to our listeners, to our viewers for the upcoming sessions. So I would really like to see you all back on the 28th of April when we talk about database security on IBM Z with Software AG, as well as in the upcoming sessions until June. So we have a very interesting lineup in front of us, and we had a very interesting session today. So thanks all for joining, and wish you a happy and sunny day. Thank you.